Hi, welcome to You Didn't Get the Memo. Thank you so much for tuning in for another great episode. Before we get started, I like to remind all of you that we're still dealing with a pandemic, and therefore it's vitally important that everyone do their part by wearing a face mask. Make sure that you're always practicing good hand washing and maintaining that social distance of 6 feet. I'm still praying for those who have contracted the virus and those who have lost loved ones and are just dealing with the grief process. Today, my guest, clinical psychologist Dr. Geraldine Kendricks, and we're going to be discussing the topic of the pile on, Pile, the pile on, dealing with the O's. And you're probably saying, what's the O's? Well, the O's happen to deal with being oppressed, overwhelmed, outraged, overlooked. And this is as it relates to the effect on Black Americans, especially when it comes to white privilege, systemic racism, that unconscious bias, and really, really key, the grieving process. I want to remind all of you that if you have questions for Dr. Kendrick, I want you to place it in the comment box, and we'll do our very, very best to get to them. But if not, we will respond after the show. So I want to welcome Dr. Kendricks to
Hello.
the show. Dr. Kendricks, thank you so much for joining me today. I am excited for us to really have this discussion talking about the O's as it relates to what's happening right now in America. So before we jump right into the questions, briefly talk about your background. I was intrigued with the fact that you chose to become a clinical psychologist. So, can you give us a little bit of your backstory and then we'll delve into some other things?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, Gloria, I want to thank you for having me on your show. With regards to my background, I will tell you, as a clinical psychologist, that I made that decision actually early on in my life, and probably like actually a lot of psychologists who go into the field, they go into the field because of something that they've experienced in their own personal family or family life that pulls them or draws them to want to get into the helping profession to be able to do something. And my story is no different. Growing up in the inner city in Youngstown, Ohio, which was steel mill towns. It was filled with challenges, economic challenges, drugs, like many other cities, especially during the 70s. So during that time, it was important for me to, which my mother had always encouraged, to get an education. And getting an education, as I said, I knew early on that I wanted to study psychology, and took that to the master's level and then on to the doctorate level. So, I'm thankful for and grateful for those opportunities that, aren't always afforded to others, through scholarships and what have you, to be able, to have those skills and to use them. And as a clinical psychologist, I will say that I have worked across the board in many different venues. I started out working here in the Bay Area in Redwood City, alternative program to hospitalization for seriously mentally ill, which included people diagnosed with schizophrenia. Back then it was called manic depressive illness, is now in the DSM-5 bipolar disorder. I worked in university settings. I did my year-long internship at University of California, Berkeley. I've worked in corporate America. I've worked in private practice. And also for many years in Fairfield, I was the director of the Christian Counseling Center. So a wide variety of
Yeah.
experience.
And I think just your experience and having the opportunity to meet you and talk with you, I just felt like that this is a perfect time, given what's going on in the country and around the world. But even more so, what has bubbled up is, as I said, the O's, people feeling oppressed, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling outraged. And so I want to jump in by first asking you, talk to us about what is systemic racism, because people hear that word, but what does that really mean? If you can actually encapsulate that and put some meat behind what is systemic racism.
Okay, so what I'm going to say is that, the opinion that I give you is my own opinion. I can't say that I read it in any book, but from what I've seen, and I think, some of the difficulty that people have in accepting that term, you hear people, black and white, denying that there's anything like systemic racism because they'll point to, people like yourself, Gloria, or me, or people who have been successful to climb, even somewhat in the corporate world. So let's be clear. I am not saying, and I don't think anybody is saying, but I think that it's sometimes felt this way when people disagree with it, that there is pervasive racism. So I think if we can get that out of the way first, then it'll be a lot easier for me to talk about systemic racism. So if we had pervasive racism, that would wherever you go that we would have no opportunity, the door would be shut everywhere. That is not the case. We do have some opportunities, and if we look back over the history in this country, there have been at times various opportunities afforded to blacks, but never really afforded to blacks openly in the same way, perhaps,
Yeah.
that they were afforded to other groups.
Hmm.
We can go back and we can talk about, Jim Crow. We could talk about, for blacks, for whites only, segregated schools. We can talk about, our men and women of color, black, that went and fought in wars and who were supposed to be able to get the GI Bill, but when they came back, that somehow it wasn't available to them. So that's where we start then moving into the systemic racism. So the way the system is set up, and again, it's not like there's somebody sitting somewhere, or maybe there is, I don't know, I can't say, that's making these executive decisions that, if blacks make this much progress, we're going to pull the plug. But that's what actually happens. We go back to affirmative action in the 70s. And shortly after that, then you had the UC Davis case where it was challenged. So whenever there appears to be some progress, that progress that we're able to make to level, we talk about
Hmm.
leveling the playing field. And that's what we're asking for. We're not asking for, you to give me a handout. I just want
Right.
you to give me a fair opportunity. So when
Right.
we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about a system in which the cards are stacked, unfortunately, not in our favor. And more opportunities and privilege are given to people who are making the decisions. If you have the pencil and you're making the decision, then you can bring on your son-in-law, or you can bring on, your daughter, and put them in positions, or their friends. So
Yeah.
that's how I see it,
Okay.
and you know, I, both in my own personal life and experiences. As I said earlier, I've worked in the corporate world, so I've seen it there.
Yeah. And I think you coming from, like you said, hey, this is based upon your experience and what you've dealt with. I mean, I could look up and get a quote Webster diagnosis for systemic racism, right? But
Yeah,
the reason why I wanted to hear from you in your own words what you feel systemic racism is. And then, as you said, coming up, there are so many things for us as women of color, and then coming from the South or migrating, to the North, what we've had to deal with and what our families have dealt with. And that's why I want to talk about the O's. I said I've just had this feeling of dealing with oppression, being outraged at the police brutality, especially as it relates to some of the cases that have been such high profile
yeah,
right now, and just the death in general of so many black people. So when we talk about, your definition of systemic racism, as opposed to maybe someone that's white and looking at it, they have a different view. And I think you and I both would agree that depending on who's sitting at the table, they're going to have a different opinion, or in their mind, they don't see anything that's wrong. And I love the fact that you said you just want the playing field to be level. I always say, I'm not looking for a handout, but I am looking for you to give me a hand up, because we have been fighting and fighting and fighting. And that's why I talked about people feeling oppressed, people
Mm-hmm.
feeling overwhelmed, people feeling overlooked when we look at what's happening even in corporate America. And how
Mm-hmm.
many times, if you've been in corporate America, have you been the only person of color sitting at that table? And quite frankly, I never got a lot of the jokes that they were sharing, because that had not been what I was accustomed to. And nobody seemed to care to clue you in on what's going on. So when we talk about the pandemic as it relates to what's happening, I kind of see what's going on as it relates to a lot of the police brutality around taking lives. That's a pandemic in itself. We're dealing with different things. So let's talk for a moment. When we talk about unconscious bias, what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean by those words? What's unconscious bias?
Okay, but before I go there, I do want to acknowledge, what you're saying about the four O's. And I think it's important to understand that, for Black people in this country, that we've dealt with, racism, we've dealt with, oppression, we've dealt with
Hmm.
feeling
Hmm.
with, being angry. And so what I have seen, and my concern is that feeling overwhelmed, feeling, overlooked, all of these things, there's a price that we pay,
Oof.
emotionally, to our health, to our well-being, to our families.
Yes.
But we've been doing it. I mean, we are probably, in my opinion, of course, probably some of the most resilient people on the face of the earth. The things that we've gone through, and then to come out of it with a smile and maybe even a song or a poem, that we will still pushing forward. So I just want to make sure that your audience understands that we're talking about these things not to just pile on more pressure and make you feel bad, but to understand
Absolutely.
that there's an awareness of if you're not sleeping well, if you're feeling irritable, if you're feeling angry, it's this is not because there's something wrong with you. There's because there's something wrong that's going on. And before I answer your question about the unconscious bias, I do want to say that if you are feeling angry, anytime you're feeling an emotion, that most of the time when we feel sad or we feel some kind of emotion or we feel pain, we try to get rid of it. But if we can start thinking differently, if I'm feeling angry, that's how I'm here today, because I was feeling angry and I needed to do something with that anger. And when there was an opportunity to talk about it, to perhaps help in some way, we want to do that. So what I would say to you, if you're feeling these things, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling frustrated, by what's going on, and it seems like, evil is getting the better hand of good, figure out what is your purpose. What are you personally supposed to do in this particular time? Because there's something that all of us can do, whether you can cook a meal or whether you can rock a
Yes.
can do
Mhm.
something. So want to say that. So now to your
Yes.
question.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So unconscious bias.
Yes.
So what that basically is that we all have prejudices, and so that goes for Blacks, white, the brand of detergent that you buy, the brand of toothpaste. So we all have a preference for certain things. The brain is actually pretty lazy. So sometimes what we will like to do is that we'll categorize things in a certain way, and that can actually start to happen when we start thinking about other people that maybe don't look like us. People that look like us, we may feel a little bit more comfortable, but even some of them we may not feel so comfortable with. But definitely, unconscious bias, can seep in when there's another race that doesn't look like you, and it brings up, some of your worst fears. We have a tendency to project onto others negativity, and when we start doing that or allow that to happen or are the recipients of it, the way in which people treat us may be different. And so the thing about unconscious bias is that it's not something that is that you sit up and say, hey, just because this person, is black, they must be X, Y, and Z. But no, it comes from years and centuries of being taught. It goes from generation to generation. I often wonder, about the Confederate flag and how so many people today can be so attached to it because those messages and those stories have been told and handed down from generation to generation. And so likewise, beliefs that people have about Black people and how they operate, or that they're not smart, or they're thugs, that gets perpetuated from one generation to another. And then when that happens, the way in which you're approached, someone, they don't know you, but they see you, and they have already assigned to you characteristics that are not who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. You covered so much right there in that last statement. It's amazing how things that have been passed down and handed down. Kids don't come into this world and they
Worship a Confederate flag.
right right or calling you or notice, they don't even notice the skin color. It's just amazing, and those are things, and thank you for addressing that, because those are the things that come along and it's packed down, and it's just continued to be uh, perpetrated throughout, families after families after families, and it's just amazing how this has just taken
Oh
on
yeah.
a whole nother life. But Dr. Geraldine, here's what I'm going to do. When we come back, I want you to talk about white privilege, and in particular, let's talk about white privilege as it relates to the loss of social programs such as Affordable Care Act, stimulus program, food stamps. So when we come back, we'll delve into that. So you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Because the fight isn't over yet.
You will see me choose to protect my community by wearing a face cover.
And even with my face covered,
you will see me.
As a son.
As a man with a never quit attitude.
As a fighter for change.
Join me in wearing a face cover.
To help stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Because this is one small act of kindness
that has the power to make a big difference.
All right. If you just tuning in, you are tuned in to You Didn't Get the Memo. And my guest, clinical psychologist, Dr. Geraldine Kendricks, is on. And we are actually dealing with the pylon, dealing with the O's. And the O's, of course, are feeling oppressed, feeling outraged, feeling overwhelmed. So, and also overlooked. Before we went to break, I posed a question to Dr. Geraldine, and that was, first of all, it was two parts, but let's start with, in your opinion, what is white privilege?
Okay, so probably the easiest way to start that is to talk about what white privilege is not. So, for, any of our Caucasian viewers, it's often very difficult for them to assign that term to themselves, to think that, I don't have white privilege. So white privilege is not necessarily being born with a silver spoon in your mouth, having everything done for you or everything handed to you. when we're talking about white privilege, vis-a-vis, Black Americans, what we're talking about is the fact that if there were any harm or danger that would come to, a Black person or a white person, that white person is not going to experience danger or harm necessarily because of the color of their skin in America, the same way that a Black person would. So when we talk about white privilege, we mean just based on the color of your skin, that there are certain values that are assigned to you because people assume certain things about you just based on the color of your skin. So that's kind of what it is for me in a nutshell, is that, you will, as a white person, never experience the refusal or, walk into a store and get the same look. There's a commercial that's been airing recently, a Black brother that's, going through the course of his day, taking his son to school, doing swimming lessons, getting on an elevator, having it, pretty much shut in his face. And then in the end of the commercial, when it's in a courtroom and the clerk says, all rise, and then the screen shot goes to the judge, and the judge, the Black man who has been given that look throughout. So when we talk about, white privilege, think about that commercial. Think about the fact that here is a man who's been educated, is law-abiding, is in a position of authority, but it doesn't matter because people are still locking their doors in their cars just because he's walking, down the street.
Right, right. And I can totally relate to that. That brought up for me with you using that example of the commercial is back in the day when I would be in the field and I'm working with my representatives, and we'd go into a physician's office and they would always turn to, the white representative and say, oh, you're training a new gal or a new girl. And rather than, a lot of them would be embarrassed, and I would just step up and say, no, I'm actually the manager. So, but again, that thought that you can't be in a higher position, and people have those thoughts, and it's all around us. You walk into the room and they say, I want to see the doctor, but if you're a person of color and they say, I am the doctor, right? So we see that, but the hope is that people watching the show, both all ethnicities, Black, white, blue, green, otherwise, that they understand how you can make an assumption about a person and you don't even know that person. You have no clue. So thank you for giving us those really vivid examples of when we talk about white privilege, because that's literally, and we see it today, not opening the door, see a Black person running up to the door and they pull the door closed or they won't hold the door. So it happens, and whether it's unconscious or consciously, people need to be aware and understand, how that feels. And that's why so many people are feeling, so overlooked. They're feeling outraged. What was the point of that? So that's why we're talking about that. But moving on.
But I think, I just wanted to add one thing to that, and that is, it's really important for us as Black Americans, for sure, to do our part, and we're resilient, and I think that that's great. But we know we need to also try to cultivate and find opportunities to educate, our white brothers and sisters. With the protests, I was so moved that across the country and across the world, that it was not just Black people. We have to go beyond, saying that, we're fighting racism. We need people who are anti-racist, who are willing to take up the banner. And one of the ways, just another short story, is that I had an opportunity in the corporate world, to participate as a facilitator for a session on social justice. And I know that it was difficult, as many of the Blacks were sharing their stories. And I thought, that's great, because, we're, willing to share, our experiences, what we went through, whether it was going to school or something that we know of, in our family history about, my, parents having to leave the South, otherwise being under the threat of being murdered. So sharing that. But one of the things that really touched me was someone who was Caucasian actually shared, and I don't know if I hadn't shared some things about my story in the South, and visiting my grandparents in the summer in Mississippi, but he then remembered when he was a child, going back, because his parents had moved to California when he was young, but he would go back to Alabama. And he remembers that he was playing with a group of Black kids, and one of his aunts, came, and she was really upset with him for the fact that he was, playing with these Black kids, and he didn't get it. He didn't understand. And so I think recognition on white part that, yes, I saw that, and maybe even participated in some of those things. I'm a recovering racist. I think it's important.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I know that people watching the show, just by folks that are tuned in and their comments. I mean, this is a great topic, and it's timely. It's always been timely, if you ask me, but it's really really timely right now that we're talking about it. So I had asked you to, let's delve into, as we're talking about the O's. The loss of social programs for people of color. Now, when I say social programs, they don't, it's just not for a Black person, but Black people are so adversely affected by things like the Affordable Care Act, that we know that's right now as we speak of it, that they're trying to strike that down. The things like the stimulus program, food stamp program. So when we talk about that, and we talk about the O's, people feeling overwhelmed. I don't know about, how, I don't know a lot of people that actually relish that, oh, you know what, I've got to be, or participate or be a part of these social programs, but you do what you got to do to survive. And when that's been taken away from you, I think that there also is a sense of people feeling just, they're outraged, they're overwhelmed, they're feeling oppressed about already all the stuff that they got to deal with. And now we have this. And who would want to strike down the Affordable Care Act in this pandemic? So your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, my thought is this, is that we live in a society, and we already know that there's a lot of inequities, just in terms of, people being able to get, good paying jobs, and to be able to take care of their families. I know so many people who well, I shouldn't say so many, but I know some people who, they look like they're doing well, but they got to work two jobs in order to do that. And so what kind of quality of life do they have? How can they really be there and take care of their kids when all of their energy and effort is going into being able to, stay afloat economically? So having, certain programs when people need them. And again, I don't think, no one is looking for someone, there might be some people, but for the most part, people aren't looking for someone, just to take care of them, just to get a check. And if they are, I think that that's misguided. But for the people who are, having a hard time, rough times, maybe due to illness, maybe due to some, some other factors, having those programs makes absolute sense. And so, the I guess the argument, that you hear, and I don't want to necessarily get into politics, but the argument that you hear from one side of the aisle is that, taking care of people, that's socialism. Well, they don't, those congressmen and senators, they don't have any problem with their health care plan, so they're getting
Yes.
socialized health care. So, our president was medevac by helicopter to Walter Reed and has gotten a treatment that no one else in the whole wide world has gotten. And so that's socialized,
Right.
medicine. So why only the top 2% of white men in this country who have wealth are supposed to make the decisions and to decide that, you were making $20,000 a year, that you should be able to make it on that. And God forbid, we're going to give you an extra $600. I mean, who knows? You're going to go out and buy a Mercedes with that. You know what? I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
Right.
That we live in a society, and listen, I will say that, and I'm really, if there's someone on this call who can help me understand, this is what I don't understand in terms of people who talk against and say that this is socialism, especially those who say that they are evangelical Christians. So I want to really understand if they've actually read the Bible. I wonder if they read in the Bible where Jesus fed the 5,000. I wonder if they've read where he healed the sick and he cared for the poor. I wonder if they read in the Bible where he told the rich young ruler that if you want to follow me, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. I wonder if they've read that when they talk about socialized health care and socialized programs. That's
Yeah.
I really don't understand how people who say that they are people of faith and that they're following God's word, and what they're concerned about is striking down, Roe versus Wade. That's I really don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, Dr. Geraldine, you're talking, even if we had 50,000 people in a room, just what you said, if you're saying that I'm a Christian, I believe I'm this, I just want to know where in the Bible that they're reading the same things that you said. And you bring up excellent points, because at the end of the day, when we think about, if you don't want people to have good health care, let's just think about the things that have been eradicated. Here was just I don't know, it was maybe about a year ago, and some student flew from China to the U.S. or from U.S. to China, had measles, and on the plane there, people contracted that. So when we talk about things that here in the U.S. that have been eradicated, why would you not want to make sure that these people have the type of health care for themselves, for their children, that they would be taken care of? And I'm with you. I truly don't even understand that. And for people who are watching and saying, well, they're scratching their head. Well, there is no The thing is that, what? We have to, as a society, be more empathetic to people who don't have what you may have, to be willing to share, to give, to help those people. And you want to know something? The people that they don't want to have, health care or these different social programs, whether it's stimulus or food stamp, the thing is, these are the people who are considered your essential workers. So help me understand, because I don't think anybody, and like you said, this isn't about politics, but anybody who's on that side of the aisle would be willing to come into a hospital and risk their lives, or take care of really sick patients, or scrub floors or bathrooms or toilets, or take out your garbage, or clean your house. So what are we really talking about here? So as you can tell,
Right.
I get,
Well, Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, we could go on for hours, but I think
Yes.
one of the things though that happens in a situation like that, and is that in order to justify one's behavior or treating someone as less than, is that
Mhm.
you begin to dehumanize them. And we had an example just last week, you
Mm.
know, after the debate, Kamala Harris was called a monster and a communist. That's all about dehumanizing her to make her less than. Once you dehumanize someone, then it's so much easier to treat that person as less than, as just uh, like a piece of paper towel that you use and you just throw it away. That's what you're there for, as an essential worker. Pick my vegetables, pick my grapes, clean my house. Yeah, these are things that are beneath me, but you should be happy that I'm giving you this job. And the truth of the matter is that there is enough wealth in the world that nobody should be going hungry. But again, you don't have the power, Gloria, and I don't have the power to change hearts. The battle that we're fighting,
Right.
about
Right. One of the
is
comments
not
from our
one.
audience is just was that their hatred is bigger than their God. Their God is money and power, and it's just like Judas. So I love the fact that people chime in, but it is definitely something for us to think about, and it just brings up all of these other things. But like you said, we could go on for hours, but
Yeah.
let's
Well, but I think that it is also just one other thing in terms of, because we're not operating in isolation, so we have to look at the policies and procedures and the beliefs of the people who have been elected to represent us. And to have Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, to say it's not about democracy. It's about liberty and power and money and prosperity. I said, what? So that's what we're dealing with.
yeah.
And so I know in the end we're going to try to get to, well, what do we do about this?
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. But with all of that, it's a great segue into the word traumatized. You know, when we talk about some of the traumas that Black people have been subjected to over the years, and you started out saying how they're still smiling, they come out, we're resilient. But you know what? When you just think about that word, traumatized. That's why we're talking about dealing with the O's, because when you are traumatized, you have to think about the fact that these people are probably oppressed. They're feeling outraged. They're feeling like they're overlooked. I mean, there's so much. It's a cornucopia of things, but the reality of it is people being traumatized. So when we talk about people being traumatized, let's just look at it in the context of what's happening with the outbreak of COVID-19 as it exists in the Black community. So, can you speak to that?
Yes. Well, I think, first and foremost is, you already, alluded to it earlier, and that has to do with healthcare. I mean, I don't know how many people that I have talked to that maybe had symptoms and have gone to the hospital, and what the, it's difficult to get a test, or then when they're tested, if it's even if it's positive, they basically, send them back home and say, well, come back when you can't, you're having difficulty breathing. I mean, I've heard people that say that that's what they were told. And so there's, concern and fear about, getting proper health care. Actually, right before Easter this year, I lost a cousin in Chicago who's 10 years my junior to COVID. And so, I mean, and perhaps that was one of the other reasons why this was so real to me, to have to attend her funeral on Zoom. I think I think they may be even still doing some of that. But
Right.
the fact that you can't be there with your loved one as they're making their transition. The most you get is maybe if you get a compassionate nurse who will do a FaceTime visit so you can say goodbye. So it's that kind of trauma, and it's not just that it's one thing. As I said, we are resilient, and you go through when we go through stress or distress, all of us, we have the opportunity or the ability to cope. We reach out to friends, and we can try to get through it. But the problem with the pandemic is that we're like at what, 216,000 people dead. It's continuing. We're having an increase. And it seems like every other week, a tape emerges where there's been, a killing. So it's the chronicity. It's one thing after another, so that there's no opportunity or in order to really recover. And so that, of course, then does put us at even more risk for developing long-term mental health issues like PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress, acute stress syndromes, sleep disturbance, and if we're not getting, adequate sleep, our bodies are at risk for developing other diseases. And, we do know within the Black community that we do have a lot of pre-existing conditions. I think if we were able to empirically measure the effects of stress on us, we would have an understanding why our mortality rate is lower than our Caucasian brothers and sisters, because of the constant barrage of stress that we have, accumulated over the years, with no real way to, decrease that. That's really meaningful. So we're told to, just be strong and stand strong. But there, I think we all have a breaking point, and what we are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, is just incredible for anyone, Black, white, brown, yellow. It's incredible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Dr. Geraldine, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, one of the things that I would like to talk about is how can people who are dealing with these O's be supported, especially dealing with, their personal traumas, and what needs to happen on a corporate level, a spiritual level, emotional level, mental level, kind of all of those. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back, and we'll wrap it up and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
3 months ago, there weren't enough masks. We were desperately sourcing from all over the world. People were making face coverings from scarves, bandanas, and bits of fabric. Now there are plenty of masks, but some people don't want to wear them. Come on. Mask up, America.
All right. If you guys are just tuning in, listen, I hope that you will go back and replay. You are tuned into You Didn't Get the Memo with myself, your host, Gloria Bailey Ray, and clinical psychologist, Dr. Geraldine Kendricks. And we're just having, as they would say, we're having a dope fire conversation, dealing with the O's. Before we went to break, Dr. Geraldine, one of the things that, because we've been talking about Black people having been traumatized from so much, but how can they be supportive in dealing with their personal traumas, especially as it relates to maybe at the corporate level, spiritual, emotional, and the mental level? Because all of those, I think, people are just
Really?
drowning in dealing with all of this. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So, I think the first thing that I want to say, and in my introduction, I mentioned that for many years I was the program clinical director of Christian Counseling Center in the Fairfield office. Um, and, there's a whole group of Christian counseling centers, within the Bay Area. But one of the things that I think is most important in terms of talking about getting resources, and I'm talking about professional counseling and resources in the Black community, is, want to destroy the myth that if you are, seeking counseling with a psychologist or with a counselor, then that means that there's something wrong with you and your relationship with God and your faith, and that you should solely and only, depend on Him, and that you should just pray, and that's the remedy. So what I would say to you is that, God uses all of His children, and I thank God that He has provided me with some tools, some ability to listen and to care, to show compassion, to show empathy. I can't, heal anybody in and of myself, but I know that people need sometimes someone who's a professional to help them sort through, certain areas and, in their life. So the first thing, the reason I talked about being a Christian counselor is that, I understand sometimes the challenge that people might have even in their families about seeking professional help, but it's not, going to say that you don't trust God. That is not what it means if you talk to a professional counselor, especially, if you seek out a Christian counselor. And I, would encourage you to do that, if your faith is, really important to you. And I think it's, for sure it is. So when we talk about trauma and we talk about serious issues with regards to mental illness. Now, for sure, if you knew someone that had a psychotic break, so what's a psychotic break? Someone that's out of touch with reality. You don't have any problem probably getting that person to a doctor and getting the proper medication and treatment. But it's some of the other issues that, I think that come up for us now with regards to feeling stressed out, with regard to worrying and feeling anxious. That's what anxiety is excessive worry or obsessing over things, and your inability to break that cycle. It interrupts with your ability to have good relationships with other people because you're consumed with what's going on with you emotionally. So during those times, it is important, that there are people who are trained who can help you come up with tools, help you recognize when you're going down the wrong path and things that you can do to break that cycle. Now, obviously, things are going to continue to happen in the world, so we have to shore ourselves up. In addition to looking at what the counseling resources are, look at what is your support system like. Who are the people in your life that you can go to, whether that's family or friends, to talk about issues that are important to you. And, we are social beings and we need to have other people in our life to connect with. And during this pandemic, the challenges of staying connected, we are all feeling more isolated, and loneliness, which can also create distress for us. So finding ways, being creative to stay connected to other people is really important. And then, it's also, Gloria, important for people to understand and recognize that, yes, eating well when you're stressed, now is not the time, to go exclusively to fast foods or to sugars and things like that. Try to, I have made an agreement with my son, the 80-20 rule. Okay, so, maybe one day a week, we can, do the pizza burger thing. But then the other days, we got to have a healthy diet. Our body needs to be fed good nutrients and sleep. If you're not getting good sleep, you're not going to be able to meet the challenges of dealing with stress in your life. And a lot of people, because we've been in this rat race for so long, people think that they can live on 6 or 7 hours a night, and it's not enough generally to get into REM sleep, deep level sleep, which is restorative sleep when the body can heal itself.
Right, absolutely. And so those things that you've talked about, and they're really great things, and they're and simple if you really think about it. Only because, and when I say simple, because how many times have you heard people say since this pandemic, I've become the size of my refrigerator. I just mindlessly eat. But now it's also about, just as you said, let's really focus on what it is that we're doing. And I guess for me, it's looking at and looking outside of the box. Okay, so I can't go to a gym, but you know what? There are things that I can do. I can walk in my neighborhood. I can ride my exercise bike. So it's also reinventing and learning what some of these coping skills are to be able to deal with what is happening. And you said something that was really key. Sometimes that old saying, misery loves company. So you have to evaluate some of the people that are in your inner circle. If everything that they speak is very negative, and it's always, it's never a way to do something and to lift yourself up, but it's always kind of the doom and gloom. If we live in the doom and gloom piece of it, then it's a downward spiral. So I appreciate you sharing these skills that people need to think about and utilize. So here's my question. What is it that you want people to take away from our interaction today? What are the one or two things that you really want people to hone in on, and to feel like that they really came away with that meat and potatoes?
Okay. Well, I think what my goal number one is for people to understand that what you're feeling is real, and it's happening to a lot of other people. And I think that the reason that I say that is because for sure in the Black community, we're so used to going through difficult times that we're not taking sometimes the opportunity to say that I need to be involved in my own self-care and taking care, of myself. Yes, we got the COVID, but I'm talking about emotionally and spiritually in all the ways. And actually, how can you, during this time, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish or anything, but to reframe, this time that you now have, every day is a gift from God. It's a day that you have never seen before.
Yes.
So during this pandemic, I've had a friend that, she always wanted to write a book. She's written a book. I've had people who are, taking languages, taking, you can take free classes at Harvard online. Did you know that? You can, so there's lots of things that maybe you can do during this time. The least of which is that this might be a time, rather than think about it as isolation, think about it as solitude. Think about it as time to look inward and to reflect on, who you are and what your purpose is and what you can do. We don't have the power to change the outside, but we do have the power to change, our behaviors, to affect our emotions. And so that's what I want people to know, is that we're not powerless, even though, it may feel like we don't have control over the big picture, but you have what you do have control over. Take control over what you have. Don't give that away.
Yeah, Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Dr. Geraldine, so much.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
Gloria, if we
yes,
have just a couple more seconds, I
sure.
did want to, and I won't read the whole thing, but as I was thinking about today, poetry and readings always help. So I just want to do just a couple stanzas of a poem by Maya Angelou. Still I rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does the does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Cause I walk like I've got all oil wells pumping in my living room? Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. So that's who we are. We will rise. We have risen. We still contribute. We still give back. We still love this country, even though, as some people say, we don't even understand how that happens.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's one of my favorite, poems from her. And you're absolutely right. And I am 150% in agreement of us moving from, the pylon of the O's, but moving forward and making some decisions. So I want to thank you, Dr. Geraldine, so much for joining me today and for us to delve into. This is a topic that's ongoing. We'll have you come back on. I thank my viewers for tuning in and just all of your comments. I want to say to all of you that if you didn't take anything away from today's show, then it's you who didn't get the memo. I want you to tune in next week. My guest will be Miss Victoria McDowell, who's a Bay Area native. She's a model, she's a spokesperson, she is a winner in the NAACP National Lift Every Voice and Sing virtual competition for the 111th NAACP National Convention. I want you to be sure and join me every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for yet another great episode of You Didn't Get the Memo. Also, be sure and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until this time next week, I want to remind all of you guys, to be well, to know how blessed you truly are, and remember to do something good for someone else. Peace.